Welcome to another episode of the new Scoreboards podcast. We have a special guest, Kayli Keough, with Honeywell International, played basketball at UCF actually while I was there when I was getting out and she was getting in. But this podcast really started with me and kind of my struggle after athletics and the transition to business and my search of a new scoreboard. So Kayli, thanks so much for taking the time and joining me. I look forward to this conversation. How are you?
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for having me on today. I'm doing well. Just living the dream over here.
Yeah, you're in St. Pete, right?
Yeah. It's awesome. St. Pete's a great place to be.
So you grew up in Tampa. And for those listening, I just want to say, in preparation to this and what I know about Kayli, like if you want to know about sustained excellence and sustained achievement in multiple different facets of life, from athletics to business, and now the general counsel of Honeywell International, who's a company that I think does about 30 billion in revenue, and my understanding is publicly traded and just a massive organization. And so I was telling Kayli before we started recording, she has officially what I would call a big girl job. And so I'm excited to kind of get into how that all transpired. But first, I was reading about your high school career and how you got to UCF. So you played volleyball and basketball and were the player of the year in the Tampa Tribune for both sports. So clearly, how did you choose basketball and why UCF?
Yeah, it's funny. I just loved playing sports from a young age. My dad and I would be watching football all Saturday long, and we'd run out and do drills during halftime. And so I just always kind of liked being active and playing. Volleyball was kind of what I viewed as my fun sport. Basketball is what I viewed as my serious or focused sport. And so when it came time to have to pick, I actually tried to play AAU in high school for both sports one year, got myself sick. So decided I had to pick one. And when it came time to decide, it was just kind of basketball was the thing that felt more challenging. Not that the sport in and of itself was more challenging, but just the way that I played it and the way that I focused and the way that I, dedicated to basketball felt more, I need to go and pursue this. I need to go take this challenge kind of a deal,
a little bit
for me personally. And so that's what ended up helping me make the decision there.
That's cool. So you get to UCF, we had some overlap. So I think the end of my career, I remember, I think meeting you in the training room, because at the end of my career, I was in the training room so much that you could just meet everyone in the athletics organization just to get going on the court. But why UCF? And then take me to those early days at UCF, kind of how those were and how that experience was.
Yeah. Hey, I miss the training room. The older I get, the more I want that
No
back.
doubt.
But so I actually originally went to Florida State. I played there for 2 years and made the decision to go ahead and transfer, take that sit out year, and continue on at UCF. So when I was at Florida State, I kind of was just feeling like I need to make a change. I need to go and, pursue something differently. And so my sister was actually coming to UCF. She had just verbally committed, and they were interested in me as well. And so her and I said, yeah, let's go play together. We'd gotten to do it for 1 year in high school, but doing it in college, we definitely were super close. So it was a fun experience to go and get to play there. And UCF's just a great school. I mean, their campus is wonderful. Their academics, there's a lot of involvement on campus, and then their sports. I knew it was going to be different than the basketball program at Florida State, but with a level of rigor that kind of challenged in a different way. And so that's what I was looking forward to. That's what I was kind of seeking out, and UCF offered that.
Yeah, the transfer, did that kind of pause where your thoughts and dreams and goals were to obviously make the transfer? Were you one of those people that had to back in the day sit out when you transferred?
Oh yeah, I was out for a full year. It was weird because I had so much free time when the team would travel.
Yeah.
And I didn't play in games, so it was a very odd dynamic. And I think it was kind of good in a way, even though it kind of delayed. I was already younger. I was 17 when I went to college, and so I had that extra year didn't necessarily delay me, but it gave me kind of the break that I needed. I think I'd gone into Florida State thinking this is going to be so hard and I have to do this and do that, and I was so kind of bundled down in things that I didn't allow myself to grow and to
Yeah.
play and to just do, right? And so I think I kind of needed that sit out year. It was tough in ways, but it was definitely, looking back on it, I'm glad that I had it.
Yeah, it just gave you some different perspective and some space and some time to kind of figure out what's next. So then fast forward, you
Mhm.
come to UCF and had a really great career to finish. That's really cool to play with your sister. I mean, I know I have an older brother and we're probably the same age gap. Like, so when I was a freshman in high school, he was a senior. So we got to play together and certainly not at the level you did in college. But that was fun. We now work
Yeah.
together too. So I mean, that bond between siblings is certainly something fun, to do life together. And so that career to finish at UCF, I mean, you end up having a good solid career. Um, and I want to talk about some of your achievements off the court, but kind of what was your mindset different when you went to UCF? Did it start to feel like, hey, college is going to be temporary, or I'm starting to think about what I'm going to do after college? Were you there
Mhm.
yet? Because had that year that you sat out?
Yeah, I think it helped. It allowed me to do a lot more networking that I hadn't done, and not so much networking in the formal sense, but just freeing up time that I could go and be on the different councils. Athletics in college offer a lot of different opportunities for leadership councils and relations with outside either uh, why am I blanking? Boosters that support the school, and being able to get those interactions. And so it kind of freed up some time to be able to do those things. And I think that did kind of help me start to focus on, okay, well, what is life going to be like? I knew early on that I wasn't going to be playing at the next level beyond college. I knew that my life was going to be in whatever career I chose. Luckily, I kind of also knew a little bit of what I wanted to do going, about midway through college. I knew that I liked the law. I knew that I was interested in making arguments back and forth, and really my personality kind of catered to it.
Hmm.
And so I knew I wanted to do that, but it was a matter of, well, the law offers so many different avenues that you could be involved in, right? You could represent so many different aspects of it.
Hmm.
So I had to kind of start to target, well, where do I want to do? What do I want to do in the law? And I don't think I really got there in sports. I think I allowed myself to instead focus on the actual sport and say, oh, I'll handle that in law school, which was nice in a way, but it's you want to be able to try to start focusing on what those things are. So I think it was an interesting dynamic, that you know yeah, it was
Yeah,
an
it's a
interesting
it's a balance. I
thought
think
there.
what I hear is very similar for me. Like honoring, like I just knew it wasn't forever. I knew I wasn't playing the NBA, obviously.
Mhm.
But it was like, but I didn't know what I want to do next. But I just had this feeling throughout college. I just like want to honor the experience. Like
Yeah,
I want to be here. I want to meet people. Like I know I'll figure it out, but I just really want to give this everything and kind of soak up the juice. Um, so it's very
that's
similar.
great.
I kind of knew like I'd probably do something in sales, like, and then it was like, but I'm not thinking about it. I'm really thinking about being here. And so by the way, did you have a mentor, or like why the interest in law? I mean, what influence at an early age said, hey, I would find this interesting?
Mhm. My dad's a lawyer, my uncle's a lawyer. I kind of had it in the family to a degree. And then just in talking with them about what they did on a day-to-day basis, and looking into more of what it was, I gravitated towards it. My brain tends to think in terms of arguments and counter arguments to start. So it kind of just seemed to make sense, that this was the path that I wanted to go. So it fell into place a little bit. I got a little lucky in that regard.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. So fast forward, you actually ended up, I was doing the research. So the Order of the Pegasus, is that the award, which is like ridiculous. Tell us about that, because that's like a very high level achievement I've never even seen. And it was something like I was reading of one of 60,000 students. Were you the first student athlete to win it?
Uh, I'd have to go double check and see if I was the first. There was another student athlete in my class that also won it that year.
Okay.
And I know they've had ones after. Actually, I believe my brother-in-law won it as well. And but it wasn't traditionally an award that catered well to athletes, because like you said, focusing on the present moment. When you're playing your sport, you're playing your sport.
Right.
Your days are all day practice, training, maybe you're getting extra shots up, and class, and maybe tutoring or travel, depending on what you have going on. And you don't really have the time to do the community involvement to the same degree as other students do, or the involvement with, say, government within, the student government body, which tends to be where a lot of that visibility goes. And so I was pretty fortunate that a lot of the things that I was involved in catered to that and gave me some visibility, and yeah, it was rewarding. It was nice to get that recognition.
Yeah, that's a big time award. And yeah, like you said, with everything you have going on, to be able to garner that attention, it says so much about you, because yeah, I mean, you're just trying to, I mean, for me, I was just trying to survive a lot of the time in athletics, right? Like you're just, you get in and the sun's still up, you get done with practice, the sun's down. There's really nothing for me that was like my social life once the season came was very minimal. It was movies and recovering and soreness and trying to stay up with class. And yeah, you mentioned the travel too. That's another thing some people don't realize. I'm sure now with more tools and digital learning and so on and so forth being more advanced, like I had to change majors because there was a pre-calculus course that was always in the spring, and spring was so busy, and like we travel commercial, so you're gone like 3 days of most weeks in the spring, and I just couldn't get a grip on math virtually, like that level of math, even though I'd never struggled with it previously in life. So I ended up shifting majors because I was behind on my credits towards a major to stay eligible, which was like shock and awe for me because I had a good enough GPA. But it was just a reference of like, sometimes people don't understand how much the travel aspect can affect a student.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. That's wild that you had to change. I've heard of that happening with students having to do that, but it is. It's sometimes you have to make the hard choice and decide what you're going to prioritize in that moment.
I remember meeting with the counselor. I'm like, okay, well, what's closest to business? I don't know. Just tell me, what can I do to still play? And I ended up graduating with like health services administration. So I don't know. But nevertheless, so fast forward, you have an interest in law, you have an incredible career, both on the floor and off, winning this major award. How do you figure out what you're doing next? It looks like the next stop was Stetson, but it looked like you were an intern, you were clerking. Like, what direction, when did that all happen, and kind of fast forward?
Yeah, so it was interesting. Law school, I started my 1L year. Your 1L year, you get the basics of law. You get your contracts course, your criminal law course, those kinds of standard. These are the big buckets you think of, right? To kind of level set you. And I had a professor who was rumored to have made people cry, but she was a phenomenal professor, just very, very intelligent, but not a lot of patience for dilly-dallying or not a lot of softness to it, right? These are the rules, and I'm going to hold you to a high standard.
Right.
And I gravitated towards that. And just because I think when you're playing in college, you're talking about your coaches who are not going to give you a break, right? You're on your 30th suicide and they're like, another.
Again.
Say, oh, okay. And this professor was just, I went from a challenge of physical challenges, day in and day out, and just what you talked about, constantly being tired and sore and all of that, to significantly more mental challenge. And so I used to say I felt like my brain was running on a treadmill as I'm reading my, whatever number case of the day, and trying to analyze that and figure out how that plays. What's the foundation knowledge I should have? And this professor was just that tough but fair mentality that you knew when you made it to the end of that class that you were going to know the material that she was teaching you. And that happened to be contracts. And so then from there on, I just kind of said, I love contracts, I love contract law, which tends to cater more towards transactional work, or say in-house work, or, there's definitely litigation that goes with it. Of course, we've all heard about the horror stories of contracts gone wrong and deals gone wrong. But for me, that definitely catered more towards transactional work. So when they come on campus, different firms or companies will come on campus, do what's called on-campus interviews. And so they'll interview the actual law students for jobs out once you get out of law school. And I've done a number of those. You tend to kind of just do a ton of different OCIs to look for what's going to be the right fit for me. And an individual came from Honeywell for the OCIs, and he was just New York accent, tough guy, kind of said it like it was, no holds bar kind of conversation. And I remember getting out of that interview and thinking, that's where I need to go. That guy's going to tell me if I'm screwing up. That guy's going to, I'm not going to have to question whether I am doing the right things, learning the right things, performing well. I will know. He will tell me if I'm sucking it up, right? And so that actually is kind of how I ended up at Honeywell, was because I just kind of followed that path of, who's going to challenge me in the right way that I can become successful on the other side of the hard.
Yeah.
And so that's how I ended up there to begin with.
On the other side of the hard, right? That's a lot of magic happens there, but it's just fascinating, but such a cool story how, you get out of school, you're used to getting yelled at, you're used to doing the extra suicide. It becomes like this unconscious thing, but then you get into class and you see that level of, fair but tough, and you actually like, you know what? Maybe you start to appreciate it more, where you go, hey, I'm diving into my career. Like I actually want this. I mean, I hate it, but I actually want this because I know it's going to make me better. And then you seek it out again, where you're like, oh, here's a guy that's maybe even tougher. Let me go actually choose to work for this person because it's going to make me better. Like that's a mindset shift, like especially, by the way, super, super cool that you would share that. So what was on the other side of hard? Do you feel like that made you better as a young attorney, as far as, how did you transition that into what you're doing now, and kind of how did that mentality that you brought from athletics to the legal world kind of affect what you're doing today?
Yeah, I mean, I think it helped me become better faster. When you put yourself through that kind of challenge, you actually get to see the results, right? And I think for me, I've always been keen on hard work always pays off. It's just, it may or may not pay off in the way that you expect it to. But there's always something on the other side of putting that work in that will pay off. And I think that's kind of where all of that lies. The big epiphany for me, and this came from sports, was that I had to transition from, oh, this is hard and I'm doing it, but it's hard. And, kind of those complaints that you do. Oh, I don't want to run today. I don't want to do my conditioning test. Practice is going to be brutal, and psyching yourself out, to then kind of chasing the challenge and enjoying the challenge. And for me, that didn't happen for a long time. I was in college for 5 years with the transfer year. So it was not until about midway through my senior season that epiphany struck of, you know what, just enjoy the ride. If it's going to stink, it's going to stink. And then if it's going to at the end of the day, it's going to get better. So enjoy this challenge, feel the confidence, feel the kind of get in the flow. And so that kind of transferred over to, and that was the whole chasing the challenge bit of, okay, well, I could sit here and it's still going to kind of be hard to a degree, but I'm not necessarily going to get better unless I really dive in, and so that was big for me in transitioning from being kind of a reactive or operating from a place of fear or obligation to a place of desire and passion and pushing in a way that really provided results.
It was like a shift between defense to offense, right? Like
Exactly.
that's such a relevant point. Like you're going to run the sprints, right? Are you going to quit?
Yeah.
No, no. Like I'm going to choose. I'm going to be an attorney. Okay, perfect. So you're going to run the sprints. It's going to be hard, but
Hmm.
seeking out that other side of hard and kind of leaning into it. It's sometimes like I remember some of the conditioning stuff. It just gets out of control, ridiculous because it's so hard. But some of the best days are the ones that you kind of make fun of it, right? And
Uh-huh.
I remember me, I would get super vocal and I'd get super loud and I'd start making jokes because like you're going to be running the sprints anyway. So you might as well
Right.
have some fun with it and lean in and work your ass off because then you'll get
Hmm.
the reward, you know?
Right.
And like you said, it may not be the reward you think, or it may not be the immediate reward, but the mentality of knowing that if the work's put in, you are going to have something on the other side kind of changes the
Hmm.
framework. And for me, like I think about the career world and I think about your journey. Um, it's like you're going to have a long career. You're a young attorney, right? And you had some really good counsel, clearly brought up the right way, and you go, "Hey, I'm going to have a career, so I'm going to have a long time horizon, so I know if I put in the work, it's going to pay off. May not be in year
Right.
1, may not be year 2, but it damn sure is going to be probably in the first 10, 15 years." And I think
Hmm.
sometimes when people get out of school and don't have that influence, whether it's athletics or not, you just want things too quick. Like you want things too
Yeah.
easy. And
Hmm.
it's kind of like you don't want what you don't want. Like easy come, easy go. Hey, if somebody's
Hmm.
not coaching at the level that you need to be coaching you, that when you get to the next level, you're not going to be prepared. So I just think that's cool, cool insight. So your path, you seek out Honeywell. It looked like you did 5 years with Honeywell Aerospace, and now you're working for the mother company, Honeywell International and General Counsel. So how did that transition go? Did you just apply for the job? Did it come up? Did somebody seek you out?
Yeah. It was interesting because when I first got to Honeywell, one of the things that someone told me, actually multiple people told me, was, you're taking this role, but you will never be X. If you take this role, this is capped, right? So just understand that if you're going to take this job and we're going to put time into you, don't leave because you didn't get this thing that you thought it was going to transition to. And at the time, I just wanted to negotiate big contracts. I
So
wanted
that
to,
that was that was what they told you when you started working at Honeywell Aerospace?
yeah,
Okay.
and it wasn't from a place of you're terrible, you'll never have this. It was a place of this is how we're structured.
Yeah.
Come in eyes wide open.
It's just not a
This role
track for
doesn't
it.
transition to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think with sports, the other advantage you kind of get, or one of the advantages you get, is kind of that chip on your shoulder
Yeah.
of, yeah, but I want that. And I'm gonna work my butt off and go get that. And so
Yep.
I think there's a lot of weapons we're armed with when we've been through the sports ringer. And so when I first got there, I knew that I wanted a role that was more of a legal representation role within Honeywell that kind of saw things from a larger perspective.
Hmm.
Um, and so I came in, I definitely was knocked off my feet trying to learn just how to negotiate these contracts. So I was right where I needed to be. I was not in a place where I was ready for that yet, but building that foundation. And I did a couple of jobs within aerospace, different kinds of roles, that all having kind of the legal touch to them, but different avenues of the business, seeing, our supply chain side, seeing our customer facing side, seeing some of our functions and how to diligence these requirements. We're a heavily regulated industry,
Right.
being in aerospace, and we do government procurements, which is another layer of regulatory complexity. So I just kind of the I just kind of tried to see where can I see all angles of this company to really understand it. Because when you get that foundation and you're broad in your foundation, it helps you go vertical,
Yep.
right? Going sideways to go up, kind of a deal. And I had met an attorney who he'd been in a number of different roles at Honeywell as well, had a long career, good reputation within the company. In one of my roles, just when I was on travel one time, um, and I guess he kind of kept me in mind. And so when a job opened up on his team, when he became the corporate secretary and general counsel at Honeywell. And when a role came up on his team, he called me up, said, "Hey, would you be interested? This is the role. This is what it's about." And of course, me, who'd been told, "You'll never get this kind of role. You'll never get this kind of role." I was like, yes, I'm very interested. Maybe a little too exuberant. But yeah, so it kind of a network concept, kind of a broadening your scope concept, but it worked out. I got lucky.
Yeah, that's cool. That's I mean, it's almost like that you had curiosity though, right? Like I'm sure you could have been in your role and just done your role well and just known what it requires and do what it takes for that role. But it sounds like you step back and were willing to kind of say, "Hey, why does that work that way? Like talk to me about that," right? Maybe even and I'm sure a lot of that was done on your own time off the clock or whatever it is, more of your own development, which is cool because that is foundation. It gives you just a different perspective and a lens to be able to add more value to the organization and probably be a better negotiator of contracts if you know how all sides kind of work together. That's super cool. So now you're in the spot you're in. So what do your days look like? What do your weeks look like? Kind of bring us into that space if people are thinking about becoming big time attorneys.
Yeah, and I'll before I answer your question, I just want to go back to some of the commentary you were making, and it's huge to be able to make those, to be able to kind of do those things. You don't get there without help. You asked about mentors earlier too, and I don't know that I fully answered that part of the question, but I've had some wonderful, wonderful mentors, and that's the benefits of working at a big company, right? Is you can spot out some really fabulous people that will give you the guidance that says, look out before you just look up. Or may help make those connections, help drive you to be a better employee, where you can have those frank, real conversations, and they can tell you, this is not how that should go. You can do better, those kinds of things. But then to answer your question on day to day, so I'm grateful for mentors, very, very grateful for mentors. To answer your question on the day to day today, it's kind of all over the place. We have 5 different businesses that are all in very different kinds of business, different industries. And so the government regulatory framework is very different depending on where you play. So playing in the world of grants are significantly different than just procurement of supply and services. And there's a lot of regulations that apply to different agencies. Different agencies have different, heightened restrictions. So it's a really interesting role. And quite frankly, it was very overwhelming when I first stepped into it, because I'd only known aerospace. Aerospace being so heavily regulated already had a lot of controls in place. And coming up to see our other businesses, it was very interesting. They operate differently. Controls, but in a different regard, in a different manner, different thought priorities, right? As to how they do that. And so what I'm trying to do now is kind of be able to bridge that amongst the different companies to say, well, where can we find consistency from a corporate perspective? Where can we drive efficiencies? And so it was definitely overwhelming stepping into it, and so I'm getting a handle on it as I've been in the role now for a little bit longer, and it's exciting because it's another challenge. So we started out talking about chasing challenges. I mean, this is absolutely something that I'm all in on. You're able to fully buy in and say, okay, I'm going to solve this problem, and I'm going to solve all the many problems that go along with it.
Yeah.
It's
so you're not,
to be able to chase that.
I was going to say, so you're not bored. That's for sure. That's kind of cool though. Like from a teamwork perspective, like you think about 5 different companies that could probably stand successful on their own, or 5 different products, or whatever the context that it should be. But then trying to find consistencies, trying to find commonalities for the greater good of the organization, where all parts benefit. That I think that's the essence of true teamwork, right? And that's cool. That comes full circle. And I do want to go back to your mentor comment, because I couldn't feel stronger about it. I mean, there's 2 things I think of. I think it takes a level of humility to know that like no one's self-made, right? Like there was a guy that we're a close family friend that is a very successful doctor, and uh and then he was somebody I would view as self-made, right? Like and then he made that comment one day and said, hey, no one's self-made with the proper context. And it just goes to the mentor side. Like along the way, there's so
Mhm.
many people that influence and help and have a tough conversation with you when they didn't have to. And
Mhm.
I'm equally as grateful for that, but I also think there's a part of that that people can learn from. I think if you're handling your business and you're becoming something that people kind of see potential in, you treat people right, you have integrity, like all the like basic human stuff that we value as a society. I think people are more likely to help too, right? When they
Yeah.
see like, oh, Kaylee's, yeah, she's sharp. Wow. She's playing sports. She's doing the things off the court. She clearly has a drive. She's seeking out challenges. Like I know as a mentor, if I'm looking at Kaylee, I go, I know if I invest in Kaylee, like there's
Mhm.
gonna be some return. There's gonna be some subjective return that I'm gonna love to watch her become successful. So I think for people, like people pay attention to that. I know for me now being an old guy at 35 years old, um, looking at younger people, like I look at that and how I want to spend my time. If somebody asked me for help and they were kind of already, I tell my daughter this all the time, like, can you push me on the swing, daddy? I'm like, you know what, if you get yourself started, I'm more likely to help you, right?
Mhm.
Like, so get yourself started and then I'll come push you. And I think your story's got a lot of that in it.
For sure, because I think we, and I don't know if this is a sports thing or a me thing, but we tend to think I'm going to put my head down, I'm going to do it. I don't
Mhm.
need help. I can just, I don't have to burden somebody else. I can just go do it. And the reality of it is, like you're saying, people want to be able to help. It provides them benefits because
Yep.
if you're trained up, now all of a sudden you're useful to them. And there are ways to approach that cater to, if you're one that says, I don't like to burden other people, or I don't want to bother them, so I'm not going to reach out. There are ways to go and say, well, I can offer this to that person. And hey, so and so, I see you're involved in a lot of these things. I'd like to learn more about that, do more of that. Can I provide this, with your advising or your leadership? And you can kind of start to do things where you don't feel like it's much of a burden, but you get to develop that relationship. And for me, that's the way I have to do it because I'm very uncomfortable asking people for help. It's a
Mhm.
growth opportunity for me. I know that. And so, but there are ways to kind of tweak that. And then you really do develop that relationship. And it's mind-boggling how much faster you get through certain challenges when you have experience from a mentor. They can
Yep.
say, this is what will get you to where you're trying to go, or these are avenues that worked for me. Try it for you. And so, yeah, it really is special to be able to have that kind of help.
Yeah, and I also think like the lens in which you approach a conversation, let's say you're asking for help, right? Or you're asking if you can take on more, is just understanding like, hey, what is like, so say if it's a boss, even though I hate that word, but let's say you go to your boss and you're like, hey, like understanding their goals, like what's important to them, like
Mhm.
how can you make their life easier? Like you
Yep.
mentioned, how by doing what you do every day do you make them look better?
Yep.
The one of my favorite two books of all times, like Extreme Ownership and Dichotomy of Leadership by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin, if you've read either of them, and it talks about leading up the chain of command. I also think as somebody coming out of school, you're young, you're impressionable, you're hungry, you want it to happen
Mhm.
fast, like, but you have to kind of lead up the chain of command and figure out those people above you or the mentors that have done what you hope to do, like developing those relationships and kind of making their life easier first, because that's a good start
Mhm.
to getting a promotion, by the way, is if you can make their
Mhm.
life easier and they look good, now all of a
Right.
sudden those opportunities seem like they come a little bit more.
Right. And those are the folks that are going to reach out to you when they have an opening on their team, right?
Yeah,
Those are the folks
they
that are going to
want you on
say,
their
well,
team.
hey, yeah, you've clearly sought them out because they're good at what they do. They're going to get their promotions, they're going to get their, expanded responsibilities, or have these big ideas for this great projects to work on. And that opens that up for you when they know you and they trust you, you've
Mhm.
proven yourself to them, then they can say, yeah, come work with me, this is going to be great. And next thing you know, you have a good working relationship with someone who is your boss or
Yep.
or your leader. And things get to flow from there. And it's the amount that it helps when you respect the people that you're working with or the people that you're reporting to, is it's huge. I mean, I'm so grateful all the time to my current boss, because he's just phenomenal at what he does. And
Yeah.
it's amazing to watch him work. And I'm like, there, I catch myself sometimes just, I'm happy to be in the room right now. This is good. I'm
Hey,
soaking up all of this.
that means you're definitely in the right room. You're definitely in the right room. So, by the way, would you consider yourself in a leadership position?
Yeah, I think so. So what I do is I lead our government contract compliance. So from my perspective, I don't necessarily have a full team of people that I'm directly managing, that are directly reporting to me. But what I do have is different folks within the business, leaders within the business, that I have to, rely on to say, this is what our standard's going to be. And not, show me you're going to execute it, or like, here's where we need to pull together, work together to get you something that is stronger than what it is today.
Mm-hmm.
We're just seeing a lot of developments in the regulatory world that say, hey, company, just having lawyers who give advice when you ask questions is not sufficient anymore. You
Right.
have to have a program that says, this is our standard, this is what we hold ourselves to, and this is what we've identified and we're fixing and are improving and all of that. So it's just a constant drive for how can we make this better.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, for leadership, where it comes from is being able to have that good relationship with the business focals that I'm working with, or the business attorneys that I'm working with.
Yep.
And being able to say, this is what our standard should be, having them trust that, and having us all bought into the thing we're going to take on. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And how about, you mentioned this a couple of times, you mentioned trust and you mentioned relationship. Like, how much easier is it to set a standard or work through a tough problem when you have a relationship, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
so much easier. And even for you acknowledging, like, no, I don't have 50 people that directly report to me per se, but I am definitely in leadership because I have people that I have to, influence, and there's got to be win-win relationships, and we have to collectively improve. That's a clue, right? Like, for all those people that say they're not in leadership, you are. Just look around you. Those relationships are super vital. I'd ask you too, so go back. Obviously, you've had, massive success, in my opinion. You're living the dream over in St. Pete, watching the sunset every night, all the good stuff. What would you say to somebody making the transition? What would you give your former self, knowing what you know now, other than what all the great fire that you've spit throughout this this last half hour?
Yeah, there's just so many lessons that apply from when you really push yourself and drive through sports. It's a very immediate gratification way to be able to transfer that to the real world, which tends to have a more delayed gratification. So I think the chase the challenge thing was huge for me. That was really, really life-changing for my mentality. I think the other thing is knowing that that all the things that you're working on, all the hard work you're putting in, is all transferable. It all applies, right? And I know that's kind of common sense, and we've been talking about it, but I remember being done with sports, entering the real world, and all of a sudden it was like it didn't matter. The sports didn't matter because it wasn't my career anymore. It wasn't my main thing of focus. So I remember thinking, oh, I put all this time and effort into this thing, and my body is broken and my back hurts. And now what? No one cares. No one gets it.
Yeah, no one cares about my jump shot. Yeah,
exactly. And no one's been through this level of hard. They'll never understand how hard it was to run that, whatever suicide or do that conditioning test. And it was a bit of a short-sighted view, right? But I was getting out and realizing that people don't fully understand your own personal worldview. And so what I had to do was learn that, yeah, but that still mattered. That still mattered because now I have this level of drive, or this gear that I can push to. It still mattered because I can be coached really hard in the work setting, and I don't have to worry about, any kind of politics or emotion or any of that getting in the way. I can still go and do what I need to do.
yeah.
And other, the chase the challenge was a lesson that's completely transferable. I had coaches, and I tended to have a bit of a hated failure, fear of failure, hatred of failure, all of that combined. And I had coaches who'd say, no next best thing, next best thing, next best thing, right? No matter what happens, next best thing. And that has stuck with me as well, as far as it was really embarrassing. That meeting went really poorly.
Yeah.
Just knowing, okay, you're not dead in the water, your reputation has not been damaged. What's the next best thing you do from here? How do you either fix this or go and move on and drive the next thing? And so I think the overarching thing for me is just everything that you're doing today matters. Every extra push that you give today matters for the rest of your life, whether you recognize it right now or whether you recognize it in 10 years, all of it you can take and run with.
Yeah. Wow. I also think, yeah, as an athlete, you're so used to failing. And we've talked about that before. You have to deal with it because the game's not going to stop because you shot an air ball. The game's not going to stop because you turned it over a couple times in a row, right? Like the game and the team moves on, and you have to constantly be, let down and then keep moving forward, let down, keep moving forward. That's something I've come to appreciate a lot because I think a lot of people struggle with building that muscle. And I also think something I part of this podcast that I talked about is like, there's a lot of general misconceptions. I think like what people think, like, here's why athletes are valuable in the workplace. I mean, a lot of it's accurate, but I think there's also those people that just because you played athletics doesn't mean that you're going to be successful in whatever way you define success. And I think the reason that it just came to me is the way you just articulated that, how transferable it is. But it's transferable if you get used to doing it within that platform. If you are somebody that's getting away with talent and you're not going to class and you don't really honor the experience and you have a bad attitude, well, that's not desirable in the marketplace. The marketplace doesn't value those things. So your athletic career is not transferable. Now, there are the things that you just mentioned that are very valuable in the marketplace, the valuable skills that people look for. And if you can get those right in a place that's pretty fun. I mean, look, playing sports is fun. It's a lot of hard work, but if you can do that in that environment, you give yourself a way better chance when the stakes get a little bit higher and you're trying to put food on the table and build a career. So I think that's something big that I think some people miss.
For sure. And where it's more muted, right? Sports are very obvious in your face.
Yes.
If you shot an air ball, that. Whereas in the real world, it's a little more muted. It's a little more, did that presentation go as well as I thought it did? Am I going to get their buy-in to go do what I want to do? And so it's a phenomenal opportunity to be able to learn that in an environment that is so cut and dry. Yeah, it's the answer. No, that's not, you scored the bucket, you didn't, right?
Yes.
And so it's to be able to have to like you said, develop that muscle in that space.
Yeah.
It gets you on, you're ahead of the game by the time you enter that world that's a little more nuanced, where you have to start focusing on the smaller details.
That's really well said. And that was the premise of why I named the podcast New Scoreboards, because sports was so objective. Like at the end of the day, at the end of the drill, if you won or lost. At the end of the game, if you won or lost. Sometimes when you get in the professional world, like you said, you're like, I think that went well. I think if there's a promote, so I think, clarifying and taking that objective, immediate feedback environment and then trying to translate it into defining some controllables in your now professional life is a worthy scoreboard to pursue. I think, skills that you're seeking, curiosity on how the other businesses work so you can collectively broaden your skill set as an attorney is a worthy new scoreboard, something you can focus in on. As we get so big, you think about a 40-50 year professional career, that could be overwhelming, and then but you really can chunk that down into objective metrics and philosophies that you've referenced throughout this. And I just again want to say thank you, Kayli. I know how busy your day is. I know we've been trying to do this for like 6 months. And, it's so interesting too. Like, I haven't seen you in so long, but obviously, it's great to see you, whether virtually or not. So I'm glad, all is well in your life. And I really appreciate you joining. I know the listeners will be better for it for sure.
Yeah. Hey, no, thanks so much for having me. I love what you're doing. I love the new scoreboard concept. It's so necessary and so helpful to kind of have that resource when people are coming out. It's again, another leg up, right? It's an opportunity. You may not be directly having a conversation with someone, but you're mentoring people. right? You're mentoring people to help them get into the real world. So I love what you're doing here, and I'm really grateful you reached out to have me on. I loved our conversation today, and I hope I'll have to make a trip over to Orlando. You'll have to make a trip over to St. Pete. We'll link up. We'll catch up.
So yeah, I was gonna say we have an office in St. Pete and Tampa, and I'm over there like once every few months, and I'm absolutely gonna hit you up. Let's have a beer, watch
Yeah,
the sunset, hang out a little bit.
love it. Love
I
it.
all right,
Let's do
awesome. Thanks again, Kayli.
it. Thanks so much, Taylor. Great talking with you.
You too.